Chapter 20. The Lost Window. I was like a deer in the headlights, so nervous and so clueless about my friend's implication that the window for me to speak up came and went without a word from either of us. Because I failed to communicate my true feelings, I might have missed out on the moment I'd been waiting for my entire life. I never imagined that dating and marrying would be so complicated. Chad was the train I never saw coming, clamoring past me to see if I would jump aboard and say yes to mothering his child. If that was the best proposal he could offer, I needed to take a moment to redefine my girlish notions of romance. We hadn't even held hands, yet alone kissed. Nothing made sense. While I chose to remain silent, waiting for a traditional proposal, Chad's unconventional train chugged on. I was simple-minded and clueless when it came to matters of the heart. The more I grew to love the guy, the daffier I became. To stay hopeful, I continually tried to remind myself that it was my eccentric nature, my trusting candor, and little girl innocence that captured his attention in the first place. On a whim one spring day, Chad and I decided to do something stupid, like raft down the Provo River, having had little experience. After climbing in the raft, the current became so strong that it was hard to steer. A felled tree lay dangerously in our path and caught us by surprise. We were rushing straight toward it. Thank God my friend pulled me down before it lopped off my head. After making it back to the safety of his truck, we began to giggle with mounting hysteria. I think that's what I loved about Chad the most. Although he was firmly grounded, he always had a yen to be playful, and whenever we were together, we laughed constantly. Because he was into current events, at his kitchen table one morning, he discussed the topic of guerrilla warfare. I turned to him and asked if jungle wars among guerrillas were a thing. Chad didn't even smirk. He just pursed his lips to avoid doubling over with laughter. Chad not only enjoyed his books, but we had a common love for music, and we both played the piano. For an upcoming ward talent show, he volunteered to accompany me while I sang a silly song on stage dressed up like a man. Chad called me afterwards, busting out in laughter. He said he just couldn't stop laughing all night. Even though Chad and I had a common love of the arts, my ignorance about the world may have been a deal breaker from the start. He was into academics and politics. I was not. Still, I couldn't help but see that he was enamored with my childlike charm. It was just a matter of how many points my charm was worth, and if it balanced favorably with my not-so-redeeming qualities, such as ignorance about wars, my inability to choose a major, and my unhealthy relationship with food. In the end, would my charm be scintillating enough to outshine academic enlightenment? That afternoon, before school let out for the summer, Chad grunted and growled beneath me as I endured with heroism his torturous virile groans. We were fully clothed. I was on top, pressing my fingers firmly around his scapula, hanging tight to my virginity with no idea what the future might hold for us. After bidding my friend goodbye that evening, I woke up the next morning to an empty house. My roommates had flown out early, heading back east for the summer. Chad was also on his way home to Bay City, Michigan. I'd be flying out that evening to California. As I plopped my last piece of luggage near the front door, I spotted a copy of Spencer W. Kimball's book, The Miracle of Forgiveness, on the coffee table. My parents purchased a copy of this book when I was an adolescent, and it was part of our library collection. That darn book haunted me wherever I went. Since I had time to kill, I thumbed through the pages, allowing them to fall at will until they landed on a chapter devoid of white space. My eyes turned to the size of Oreos as an army of sins swarmed across the page like little killer ants that bite and cause death. Sins of commission, sins of regret, sins of omission, sins of neglect, sins of adultery, sins of abuse, bouncing to the rhythm of Dr. Seuss. Red sins, green sins, fat sins, thin sins, lock 'em in a box sins, fancy colored socks sins. You hide 'em, you wear 'em, audaciously declare 'em.
stupidly confessed sins,
display them just like art sins.
The list goes on and on, sins.
Like killer ants that march, sins. I was already missing Chad. According to Kimball, every human soul is laden with sin, with legions so copious within us. Why even bother trying to be good? Dealing with my strong feelings for the man I loved was challenging. Because Chad had never made a move on me, I felt like a reservoir behind a weakened levee. Solo play was the only safe way to release all my tension. Why did I open that book? Yet hadn't I held on long enough? Alone in the house, I was finally free to do what I wanted. Through the years, I occasionally practiced giving myself a hand behind closed doors. Now, on my bed, this wasn't my first attempt, although a little rusty, like a piano novice. Gracefully lowering my fingers onto the, air quote, keys, I began to tap. My fingers were the next best thing to the tub spout. A month prior, I attempted to play Mary Had a Little Lamb. Although still a beginner, I confidently tapped out Ode Joy and cheered myself on. The more I practiced, the more proficient I became. A few beats later, I let out a slow whoosh, then played on through Beethoven's Turkish March, accelerating full speed ahead to Flight of the Bumblebee. I groaned low and wailed high through the scale of notes as waves of joy hurled through me. Then after a pause, I let out an ecstatic sigh, dramatically curling up my fingers as they drifted off the keys. The music had stopped, and the recital was over. The only sound was that of my pounding heart as I lay in awe of my shining performance. Yet my elation was but for a moment. Guilt and shame were a rotten audience. Not one lousy applaud or encore for my ability to take myself to the moon and back. Instead, they had the audacity to shove me on my knees as I wept and pleaded for God's mercy. As an artist, I grew up in a world where self-expression was boundless. I lived during the sexual revolution. The changing world could have helped me accept and appreciate myself as a healthy sexual being. But I was programmed to shut down my sexual self and feel shame. Shame for my body. Shame for having carnal desires. Shame for wanting to go to bed with Chad. Nothing but shame.